And welcome in to another episode of Tiger Territory, New Digs. What up? I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, the man who slays in hammer pants. He is Cody Stavenhagen. How you doing?
Hammer pants. Did not see that coming. Wow. That's how we're introducing our first YouTube video of Tiger Territory. I tried to get a hold of MC Hammer himself for the story I worked on about celebrity fans of the Oakland A's, where I got an awesome email from Tom Hanks. No
Yeah, I remember.
response from MC or any of his reps, or, they couldn't get a hold of the man.
That would have been a wonderful addition. I feel like MC Hammer could use all the good publicity that he could. I mean, people our generation probably think of him from the clip from White Chicks, where it's like, "Am I broke or MC Hammer broke?" MC
Yikes.
Hammer broke.
Yikes.
So,
All right. We're starting off a new era with MC Hammer catching strays. I like it.
too legit to quit. All right. So this week, Cody, we already did a wrap up of the Tigers season, and shortly thereafterward, you and the rest of the media got to talk to Scott Harris and AJ Hinch, and what was, I imagine, sort of a interesting circumstance for you, because in all your time on the beat had not had to do a season recap that concluded with such disappointment, such as blowing a 2-1 lead in ALDS, and then just all the emotions that come with it. We do a lot of vibes on this podcast. Those that listen to us know this. So let's transition a little bit to tone, because a lot of times these end of season press conferences are, they're supposed to kind of garner interest going into the next year. And that is probably amplified when you have a not so ideal season or a losing season. So it's like, all right, we really like these young players, or, we have a plan. It's kind of a selling job, really. This time around, obviously there's still some selling to do, but the what you have to sell looks a lot better than it has in years past. So I'm kind of curious from Scott and AJ. You've had more of these with AJ than Scott, but just kind of like, what was kind of the tone? How would you kind of classify the overall theme of this end of season presser that we had this week?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a hopeful tone, right? I mean, it was interesting to hear Scott Harris kind of articulate the exact same emotions I think some of the players were kind of trying to convey after the game, and that, like, he called the loss, I think, a gut punch, and it was. And at the same time, he talked a lot about how proud he was of the team and the tone that was set for the future. It was kind of funny, AJ, we talked to him so much. He's such a good quote. He was up on stage with Scott and got like maybe two questions, like, because everything kind of was geared toward, the president of baseball operations. Where is this team going? What are you going to add? Who's coming back? And in there wasn't necessarily as much of a clear tone as probably like some fans would have hoped for. And maybe I was very curious to see how they were going to package things, how they were going to message things. And in a way, Scott Harris did an artful job of like not really saying a whole lot that was super newsworthy, giving more just general overview thoughts. And that's also fair because it is, like Scott said, well, 48 hours after the last game, they haven't had exit interview meetings. There's kind of only so much he can say. But even if you think back, like after the 2021 season, I feel like AJ and Alavila were pretty forthright and like, this is a big offseason for us. I don't remember their exact quotes at the time, but I feel like there was a very palpable tone of like, we're going to add to this team. And that message was a little bit more unclear. Scott Harris, as you can kind of imagine, or I at least could have predicted, he would say this, said, dollars spent is a convenient measure of activity, but it's not really how we look at things. We're going in terms of talent added. How do you gain talent? And that's a perfectly fine and fair way to think about things, right? But it obviously leaves a lot of questions open regarding how aggressive are the Tigers actually going to be, whether it's free agents, whether it's trades, whether it's making sure that this is the start of a new era of Tigers baseball and not just a very strange flash in the pan over the course of 2-3 months.
Well, that's the key, right? Because, we were on foul territory early this week as our kind of like our launch, I guess, with the new network. And AJ Przinsky is asking us about, like, are the Tigers going to add payroll? And as I'm answering that question, like, like I kind of have to give. It kind of sounds like a splash of cold water. Normally, we're doing that for Tigers fans, and so now it's like a national platform where I'm just kind of like, I there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that that's something that is going to happen, at least to the scale that everyone expects. But it got me thinking. There's now all of a sudden like pressure and expectation, not from the fans in Michigan, but like baseball people in general are kind of like, all right, well, now the Tigers are good. Now they have to spend money. And that's kind of like the national person is going to kind of parachute in and have their opinions. And some of them, quite frankly, are outdated. Like if you expect a Mike Ilitch type spending, like I don't really have any good news for you.
You haven't paid attention to the Tigers since Mike Ilitch was owner. I don't necessarily blame you, but
yeah. So the thing is that like Scott is not like talk about talk radio points. Now it's like national. Now it's satellite radio points. Now everybody's going to be talking about the fact that the Tigers like have to spend, and Scott. Not that he cares, but like that's going to be like he's going to get texts. I just guarantee you, he's going to get texts from the Passons of the world, from the Rosenthals of the world, from I don't know if Mad Dog texts presidents of baseball operations, but like if he did, he would be getting those texts of like, asking his opinion. He's going to be getting those in his inbox more than he ever has, obviously, as someone who is in charge of a front office. And so that to me struck that is sticking out in my mind right now because like that is the first indication I feel like that the Tigers are on another level national conscious wise. You see what I'm saying? Where it's like now like people are going to be like, okay, this was fine and good, but what are you going to do next? And the quote about he needs to, we don't believe in like adding, dollars. We believe in adding talent. That's a paraphrase, of course. A lot of times they're the same. Not always, but a lot of times they're the same. And an example would be like Lorenzen 2 years ago, Flaherty last year. Those guys didn't sign for league minimums. Like I know they're 1 year deals and overall not that much, but like there was a dollar figure that when they both signed, especially Flaherty, and something that we were basically wrong about when the signing happened, like, oh, it seems like a lot. You talk about the salary aspect of it. And any names that get tied to the Tigers, and I don't mean like reports, just like, oh, this guy makes sense for this team. That's going to come with like an expected dollar amount that as of now, I just have no evidence to anticipate that he's going to match. Like one of the things that I thought, I was like, does this playoff run like make it more or less likely to sign Alex Bregman? Because I could talk myself into both of them. One of them is, no, it doesn't because they're going to keep doing what they do and they're going to try to build it their way. Makes sense. The other part is, all right, now we have this window of opportunity and includes Skubal under team control, which we'll talk about that part in a second. Young team, that was all fine and well, but you still, you lost to a team had more veteran players than you, correct? So like Bregman, like the fit in theory is higher than when we were speculating about this in years past. So I guess you can kind of take that in whichever direction you want, but I was kind of talking my way into both possibilities, kind of knowing which one would ultimately the team would land on.
Yeah, I mean, I think just naturally it makes more sense that the Tigers could be in on Alex Bregman now. Think back to conversations we were having in June, early July. Like, is this the core? Is Scott? I said at the time I never got the sense Scott Harris was in any like hurry, and I stand by that. I don't think he was. I think he's thrilled that this team overperformed and exceeded expectations. I don't know that that's going to incentivize him or the organization to push all its chips to the middle in extreme fashion. But if you listen to things Scott has said, it was always like, we'll supplement the core when the times is right. Well, now you have some evidence that you can win with this core that is here. So if there's, is there going to really be a better time than now? I just don't think so. I think you have pretty obvious needs at both corner positions. Scott Harris did outline two general areas of need, which was a right-handed hitter and more pitching. He didn't get specific beyond that. And again, I don't blame him. He's not going to sit there and say, yes, we're going to sign Alex Bregman. Like, nobody says that. That would be dumb. Now, does Bregman, so third base? I think Bregman makes sense. What we don't know the answer to is, even if they spend, how do you define spending? I don't think they're going to even make a call on Juan Soto. I guess I could be wrong there. I'm not reporting that, but the Tigers aren't going to be in on Juan Soto. I think we all live in reality and mostly can accept that. Is Alex Bregman in the realm of reality? And what's the market for him coming off a good year? If we're talking 200, something like that, I kind of have a tough time seeing the Tigers make that kind of commitment based on what we know, how this regime likes to run an organization. But say take that down just a little bit. If Christian Walker is 3 years, 60 million, again, this is just total guessing. That's spending, that's being aggressive, but it's a different level than committing dollars and, more importantly, I think years, because that's how you get a contract like Javier Bias that's completely underwater. So I could see Scott continuing to favor, maybe you're up in the dollar amount and maybe you're signing multi-year deals now, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're handing out the mega deals. If I just had to guess, that's probably kind of what I would expect from the Tigers, and that's why I've pointed to Walker a couple times as a guy I like. If you just look at first base in general, there are some guys who can make a lot of sense in Walker. I mean, Alonso is probably not going to be cheap, but he's in that territory as well. Anthony Santander makes a lot of sense. Probably the low end of this is Carlos Santana, and I don't know, you can get him on a 1-year deal for not that much. So does that make him attractive to the Tigers? Probably. And he had a 934 OPS against left-handed pitching. So those are some things to think about there. I'm as fascinated as anyone to see exactly where the Tigers land. But here's also why it's always difficult to talk about. Talk radio wants to say, you have to spend. You have to spend. And that is kind of the laziest possible take in terms of building a baseball team in 24. At the same time, I get why front offices don't want to spend, but front offices are also very cheap and risk averse these days. That's just factual too. So where are the Tigers going to land on this spectrum? Everyone likes to view it through one end or the other, and there's got to be a little bit more of a middle ground that I think a lot of good teams strike.
Well, for sure. I don't know how much they talk about spending, in the Cardinals organization, for example. I do know that spending is brought up a lot with both New York teams, even though they tend to spend a lot. But that's brought up. It's brought up with the Red Sox a lot. I mean, every fan base wants their team to spend, to get better players and thus, in theory, have better teams. I've never been concerned with dollars because, no salary cap, right? Years are what always get me. And of course, we'll talk about him here in a second, but the Javier Bias conversation is definitely part of that. But sticking with first base for a second, this is not my opinion. This is just what I anticipate, anticipate an organization trying to do. It's still hard for me to get over this, we're going to sign somebody for $60 million to more or less take Spencer Torkelson's job. I'm not saying it's the wrong move. I'm just saying it's hard for me to envision a franchise doing that, even though, again, Tork was not one of Scott's draft picks. Even with the Santana element there, the 1-year thing, I guess, that's another reason why the Bregman part, appeals to me a little bit more, because then it's all right, you address the right-handed hitting, you address one of the corners, and then you try to do the thing that you claim as an organization that you want to be known as, which is that players improve here, young players get better, we build around young players. Tork is a guy that in theory should fit that mold. There's also an agent element to this that doesn't get talked about, and it's that agents aren't putting their clients up against each other, especially clients that are of high profile. So that's something that ought to be considered as well when you're thinking about it. And another thing in regards to first base, is there a world where you upgrade third for whatever, even if it's not Bregman, but you make a considerable upgrade to third. You keep Vierling in this kind of super utility role, and then you more or less platoon Jahen and Torque at first base. And I don't mean like a lefty righty platoon, but like you make that the competition at first base. Is that like, all right, here's your hitting competition. You got to hit better than Jahen if you're going to be playing Spencer Torkelson, like as opposed to signing somebody for $60 million. I'm just throwing out possibilities here.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take, and I do want to clarify what I said. Like, although it's very easy and lazy to just say spin, 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 I think the Tigers need to be aggressive on some level this winter, whether that's a trade, whether that's looking at Brent Rooker, who's really only kind of a DH now, so maybe he doesn't make as much sense as we once did. Like they have to add to this roster. They have to get more hitting. The reason I lean first base, look, if they're willing to spend 7,200 or whatever on Alex Bregman, I think they should do it. I think proven winner, experience, like do it. But let's operate under the world in which they're not comfortable with this. The reason I lean more toward first base, I think comes down to like, which do you feel better about? Matt Vierling and Jace Young platooning at third, or Spencer Torkelson being really your only real option at first base? I would take Vierling and Young 1,000% of the time. Vierling is a solid player. You're still very interested to see what Jace Young can be. And at first, the ceiling's pretty good, but that floor is also very, very low. I like your Jahen idea too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if coming into camp, Torque and Jahen are like competing for the same roster spot. Very curious to see if either of them will try a different position, as I've suggested before. Maybe Torque outfield, as we've suggested a million times, Jahen first base. So right-handed, corner type, DH type. They seem to fill a very similar role. I think it would almost be hard to have like both of them on a roster. I mean, I guess unless you're getting like the 30 homer version of Torque, but even that version of Torque like needed to get on base more and needed to play better defense. So it's tough, like, but just because you're signing a first baseman, especially if you do it on a shorter term deal, you're not necessarily giving up on Torkelson. You're basically looking at you're basically extending the time frame to figure out what the heck to do with him. And I think if you're trying to make the postseason next year, just running it back with Torque as your only real guy at first seems very, very dangerous to me.
Well, it is, and to Scott's credit, he did lay out there like obviously had a turbulent season, and like he's gonna have to put in a lot of work this offseason. That's really the age old question with Torque, because we didn't really get like as much tangible evidence of changes made in AAA leading to his call up. Like there's some things you can kind of look at. You can try to diagnose his swing if you wanted to. I did make
Like
note that
the
he was
bat
a much
angle is a little different.
he
He
was
was
a much
magically way better going to his backhand side. I don't know what the heck they did differently. He suddenly went from very bad to like pretty good at it.
well, he also became a better hitter in the batter's box. What I mean by that is he started walking at a clip that was astronomically higher than he had before, he got sent down. So again, what is that worth? I don't know. But I have to imagine that there's a huge like amount of data and work and coaching that they're gonna have to go give him in this offseason, and he's gonna like this is kind of like a not take it or leave it, but in terms of how the organization views you, I kind of look at it as like a little bit of a take it or leave it offseason for Torque. Like take this coaching, take this instruction, and make something out of it. There's a long list of guys that they have like given a plan to, and when they adhere to the plan, they improve. So they're not in the interest of trying to get you to do something you can't do. That's the whole point of this organization. So if you can take it, then your stance in this organization is a hell of a lot higher. If you can't, things could get really uncomfortable for you really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that assessment. It's also a lot easier to give those plans. And like this organization is great at developing pitching because pitching, just the nature of it, it's easier to give a guy a plan and you have tangible metrics and pitch design and pitch labs. And like, it's just harder for hitters. Across the game, every organization, it's just hard. And the reason I cannot be that optimistic about Torque is he has 1,400 major league plate appearances. Like, what more data do you need than that? You know, there's some good in there, but there's not enough good that you can risk basically making the playoffs again next season on, in my opinion.
No, I mean, it's probably the most uncomfortable element of this organization right now. Because again, one of the front facing guys of a rebuild, number one overall pick. People can just kind of cling to the counting numbers from 2 years ago. Like it's one of the more like I said, uncomfortable aspects of the organization.
Right
The
up
other
there with Casey Mize and Matt Manning.
That as well, and Javier Bias, who was also like talked about, which actually, there was some conversations like, why is he with the team stuff, the people that were just kind of mean spirited on X. By the way, Cody's at Cody Stavenhagen. I'm at Kieran_Steckley. I thought it was, I understand having a problem with him kind of being in the clubhouse. A lot of guys are there that aren't playing, and he is someone who has some. First of all, he's well liked. There's a Russell Westbrook element to Javier Bias. Oh man, that's a great analogy. And like guys just love him. You know what I mean? Say what?
He's
Well,
got a
yeah,
ring.
He's got a ring, but Russ could have had a ring there in 2012. But Javi doesn't have an MVP. Russ has an MVP. So there you go. So there's an element like guys in the game love him more than people outside the game, and so I didn't understand any pushback to that. But Scott was really trying to cover his bases talking about Javier, where he's just like, he has a role on this team. He's got to get way better. like it was kind of talking out of both ways, and like basically saying like, look, we're not cutting him. We're gonna have to figure it out. That he is certainly not penned in to the starting rotation. But then again, or it's not starting rotation, starting lineup. But then again, it's not like Trey Sweeney's. As much as we like can admire what he did down the stretch here, it's not like he was tearing the cover off the ball. It's not like he was elite defensively. Like that is still a position that could end up being a hole in 2025.
Yeah, Trey Sweeney was not great there in the postseason, but Baez, like, no, I look, I think it was good that he showed up. For a while, I was worried, like, is he not going to be there for the playoffs? Because that's awkward. Usually, guys who are a part of the team on the 40-man, like, are on the 40-man if they're like injured or whatever. So 60-day AL are going to be around. Like Christian Yelich is on the top of the Brewers dugout. And I was very curious if Javi was. Sure enough, he was. He even drove himself from Detroit to Cleveland. So good on Javi. Scott's first part of his answer about Javi was like, paraphrasing here big time, but like, I said we needed a right-handed bat, and Javier Bias does hit right-handed, and he got killed for that. And I think if Scott had to do that over again, he just like, I think he just would have not said that. Like, I don't think that came across probably how he meant it in his brain, because then he did go on to say like, if he can rotate like he used to, which is an interesting one. Like, I guess being healthier couldn't hurt, but I don't think any procedure at this point in Javi's career is going to bring back 2018 Javi Baez. You're hoping you can get league average production out of him at this point, and there's also a lot of data suggest that might be a stretch.
Sizable gap.
When you're under contract for 373, like, so you talk about the Torque thing, like you kind of got to try because he's a talented young player. Like when you're paying a guy 373, you kind of got to try. And I think that's kind of what Scott Harris, like, if you read between the lines, that's what he's saying. Like, look, we don't have much of a choice but to run this back and hope he's healthier and hope we can get something out of him. I think the real question is he actually going to be a Tiger all the way through next season? It sure doesn't seem like they're buying him out this winter. Scott said he'll be a participant in spring training. Unclear if he's going to be ready to play opening day based on the health of his hip. So what if he comes back and he's had the surgery and he gets healthy and he still stinks? Would that change the equation? I don't really know. It's still a lot of money, as you've been kind of the first guy to point out, Kieran. But I think that's kind of the question, is not, does he show up in Lakeland? I don't think there's any question he's showing up in Lakeland. But if he comes back from the surgery and it's more the same, then could we see some level of action taken?
Yeah, well, in the era where they crack down on the Phantom IL, it's a little it's a little harder to hide guys in that situation. I feel like there was some talk here that was like a little bit like charged. Let's go to like a little bit of a positive, potentially positive development that would constitute spending is the potential for a Tarek Skubal extension.
Ooh.
We were asked on foul territory. Well, you were asked, and then you needed help, and I couldn't help you at all. It was like, who are the top 3 extension candidates for the Tigers? And you were like, Skubal, and a little spiel there, and then Green, a little spiel there, and you're like, Kieran, do you got one? I was just like, I was going through the same thing in my head. I was like, I don't really think there is one.
I think that's just a reminder of how hard extensions are. We're in this age where they're very popular for kind of relates to the free agency stuff we just talked about. When teams have good young players, they want to pay them and lock them up while they are still young and have them under their control. Teams hope that saves them money in the long run. It also helps them kind of avoid the risk factor of paying a guy 7 years when he's already 30 or whatever. And so even though these deals are really popular, they're still really hard to find the right fit. Like, it was Colt Keith pre-debut extension was kind of creative. It makes sense. The Tigers don't really have a pre-debut guy, who's at a high enough level in the minors that you would want to pay. At least I don't think. And if you're going to pay like Max Clark right now, like, you wouldn't, I don't think you're going to pay him like, a couple mil while he's in Erie next year. So as we've discussed, like Riley Green, great player, had a great year. How do you feel about his health? What does Green's camp want? Maybe like if they were to extend anyone, that's probably the most realistic. Even there are complicating factors. I said like Kerry Carpenter and Eric Kratz to his craze, like, oh, you're not extending a platoon guy, and he's kind of right, because like why would you? And if I'm Kerry Carpenter's camp, I'm trying to be like, well, we think he's more than just a platoon guy, so we're not going to take platoon money. I guess Jackson Jobe, who relates to Tarek Skubal. Jobe's a Boris client, and then you're paying pitching, which I at one point had come to the decision I was not a fan of. Like, I'm just not paying pitchers ever because they all break. I've changed my mind on Tarek Skubal. I think if you have the best pitcher in the game who is still young, has the chance to dominate for years to come, you try to pay the guy. So if I'm Scott, I think I said this on foul territory, I make the call. If I'm Scott Harris, I make the call to Scott Boras. And I don't know if that conversation is going to last more than 10 seconds, but I think you gotta try the Godfather, like, name your price. What do you want? I know you think you can get them a lot in 2 years' time. We're willing to give you a lot right now. Because if you were to move on from Skubal, all you're going to be trying to do is replace him. So yeah, it's all total hypothetical talk. I don't know that Boras would still be willing to do it. I would lean toward probably not, but it's an interesting thought.
Well, there's most of these now, it's position players, so it's a little bit different, but a lot of these like massive extensions are kind of formulated in the way that it's like, all right, in year, making it up, like Bobby Witts or whatever, like in year 9, it looks like a pretty favorable deal for the team. Colt Keith, there's an element. You look at the contract there where it's like, if you anticipate this level of production, you're paying for this. Like, there's a good deal there. There's also an element of wanting to take care of your own guys, which I think is something that Scott Harris would like the organization to be known for. Obviously, there's a time and place to kind of do that kind of thing, but I think that would be something that he wants. And in general, you have an opportunity this winter, Cody, to change the reputation or the perception, more specifically, of your franchise. Whether that's how you handle yourself in free agency in general, what the Bregman type of deals or whatever, or it's taking care of the school ties, because now you have a track record as an organization of winning and developing players. So like that talk about things to capitalize. I think in some way they have to capitalize on that, because you're never going to take the next step as an organization if you don't if you don't change your mindset. To use an example, Cody and I are very familiar with. Oklahoma State, my freshman year, goes to the Fiesta Bowl, beats Stanford, number 3 finish. Cody's freshman year, that recruiting class was the same as if they had been, didn't have that success in the years prior. Like, it was just kind of the same type of recruiting class. And the result was struggling to get bowl eligible, that year. And then just kind of a circus of quarterbacks there after that. So like, Gundy didn't change his mindset after a historic season. This is obviously not a Fiesta Bowl type season for Scott Harris, but it is an opportunity to change like how people view your organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. One real quick note on the Scooble thing. Like, I think if there's any structure that could get a deal done, it would require an opt-out after like year, 4 or 5. You pay Scooble more than he's going to make in these upcoming arbitration years, but you give Scott Boras an out basically a couple years after that to test the open market again. That could be something that could make sense for both sides.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone would object to that. If it's one of those things that gets it done, then I feel like that would be a win all around. And again, a win for the fan base, a win for relations with players and agents. And so, like, I don't want us to have the kind of conversations that we had this summer, where it was like, are they doing enough to take advantage of Scooble's like team control years? That I feel like this season should
you still trade them.
Yeah, can we go a summer without Tarek Scooble trade rumors? I think
no, we won't. I don't think we ever will. Even if the Tigers are the best team in the league next year, I think we'll hear about it.
Very true, very true. Fascinating to see how they handle it. I say this all the time because he's so new at the job, but it is like another test for how Scott Harris is going to handle this aspect of organizational building. And I'll repeat myself in case, we have some new listeners. He's a guy that claims he doesn't believe in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 year plans. The evidence for not believing in quote year plans is like, what if you unexpectedly make a run to the division series and you arguably could have been in the championship series? Then you have to adjust. You have to pivot. And this is a pivot moment for Scott Harris.
Pivot moment, I think a huge offseason in his tenure. I mean, I guess that's kind of like the election, like every year, every election is like, this is the country at a crossroads. Like, I guess every offseason is like a pivotal offseason, but this is like this turning point, kind of an inflection point in the org. And how do you push forward to make sure that you don't revert to a young team that wins 78 games next year? Because for me, it's not hard to see a world in which that happens. But I also think with a couple of the right key additions, that won't happen. And you can be contending to win the AL Central.
There is, I mentioned expectations earlier. I'll close with this. There's like, all right, well, you had this young team, you made this run. Kind of reminds me of AJ Hinch's early tenure. Jeff Passan wrote this. Reminds of AJ Hinch's early tenure with the Astros. And it's like, could this be a team that's perpetually in the postseason and making some kind of run? He wasn't putting the expectations of like LCS, 7 straight years or whatever. But he was like, could this be the beginning of something? There's your expectation. If you're Scott Harris, you're Riley Green, you're Tarek Scooble, you're AJ Hinch, you're Kerry Carpenter, Spencer Torkelson to whatever extent. Like, there's the expectation laid out for you. How are you going to handle it? So it will be a passing off season, and we will be here on Tiger territory, not turning the corner, on Tiger territory as a part of the Foul Territory Network, covering it every step of the way. We'll have multiple podcasts a week. during the off season, we'll up the ante a little bit once the season starts. A season that I'm sure everybody is very eager to see what happens. Cody's got to get some rest, though. All right, we don't have to get the 2025 season started too soon, but it's going to be a lot of fun, and we want to thank everybody for making the transition from turning the corner to Tiger territory, and any new listeners we might have picked up, as joining the network. It's a great honor. I know Cody and I are very excited to be a part of this organization, and it's just. I can just tell it's going to be a lot of fun. AJ Przinsky's giving me bear down as soon as I get on the show. Like, it's going to be a lot of fun being a part of the Foul Territory family. So want to thank everybody for following us along at Tiger Territory _ at Cody Stavenhagen. I am at Kieran _Steckley. And be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Tiger Territory. For Cody Stavenhagen, I am Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.